Hi everyone, I'm here in one of the biology labs at Temple University where I teach, and today for the science of scary I've brought in a preserved specimen of a horseshoe crab. Now this species name is Limulus polyphemus. It's one of just 4 species of horseshoe crabs found in the entire world, so they're kind of a rare small group. But they're actually pretty common in coastal waters. You can find them in all of the world's oceans. They definitely look fierce and scary. I'm going to take you on a quick tour through their anatomy, and we'll see how they're put together and how they live their lives, and you're going to find out that they're actually a lot friendlier than they might appear at first glance. So these species are often described as living fossils, and this specimen here definitely has that sort of like primitive fossil-y kind of look. In fact, if you look at actual fossils of horseshoe crabs, they bear a striking similarity to the ones that we have with us today. So it's a group that's existed for hundreds of millions of years, but in a general sense, their bodies haven't changed a whole lot through that long period of time. So they struck on a good way of living early on, and they've been sticking with it ever since. So let's start off here on the dorsal or back surface of this horseshoe crab. I'm also going to bring him right up to you, so don't be alarmed. He will not come through your screen. One of the most prominent features on the front side on this dorsal surface is this large eye right here, and there's another one on the other side. So they have a pair of compound eyes, sort of like insects do, to help them see. What's much less obvious is that they have another pair of eyes right here, these medial eyes, which are much simpler. They're capable of sensing kind of light and dark shadows. If something swims over them, those eyes will help detect that. You'll notice from the side that he's got this sort of broad, almost shovel-shaped front end, and this exoskeleton, this hard outer covering, actually helps them dig down into the sand. That sand just flows right up around them. So when they want to burrow under the surface and get away from everything, they've got a body shape that really helps them to do that. So you've probably also been looking at this large tail spine here, right? That's part of what makes them look really fierce. And it seems like it would be a great weapon for stabbing something or attacking predators, but that turns out it's not actually what it's for. If this poor unhappy horseshoe crab gets flipped over on its back, they can use this spine to dig into the sand and help themselves flip right back over. So it definitely looks fierce if you're thinking about making a meal out of one of these things if you're an oceanic predator, but it turns out to be used in a much more gentle fashion. Okay, now let's flip this guy over and we'll look at some of the really scary parts of this. So, as I bring him up to you, you'll notice that there's this series of claws, right? These appendages that all end in claws right here. It's kind of tough to get a view of the claws there, you can see. And those again look like they're pretty fierce, but their main function is to help this guy walk along the bottom. So we've got these nice pairs of legs to help them move along. It might be a little less obvious, but there is one more pair of legs, little claws right here, right at the top. Now you may be asking yourself, where is the mouth on this horseshoe crab, right? We tend to imagine that other animals are put together the same way we are. So the first place you might think to look for the mouth is right up here, and it turns out you would be wrong. The mouth on a horseshoe crab is very non-intuitively right down in here. It's underneath the sort of elbows, if you will, of all of these mouth parts. So these little claws in front can help the horseshoe crab find some food and then bring it towards this mouth. I have to put it down now to demonstrate because they're actually sort of chewing with their elbows, those parts of their arms that are right up close to the center of the body where their mouth is. So they mash up their food like this and then just pass it that short distance towards their mouth. So again, these really kind of scary looking parts and pieces are actually a bit friendlier once you get to take a closer look. Now I can tell that this horseshoe crab is a male, and I can tell that from this first pair of claws right here. This is going to be one of the hardest things for me to show you, but there's this really round, bumpy part right here, and then this single little hook. Right? If I put my finger behind it, maybe you can see that it's just one little hook and this big bumpy projection right there. And that's a feature that only males have. A female would have that first pair of legs that look identical to the legs that come afterwards. So there is one sort of simple, once it's been explained to you, way to tell whether you've got a male or a female horseshoe crab. And the last thing I'll describe here on the underside is near the back. You may have noticed these sort of plate-like features, and this is actually how the horseshoe crab breathes. It's called a book gill because it looks a lot like the pages of a book, right? In fact, it's tough to tell on a preserved specimen, but this first page right here is sort of like the cover of the book. It's really thick and leathery. And then the pages that are underneath are much softer and finer, and that's where all the water flows across, and that's how the horseshoe crab gets oxygen and how it breathes. If I go back to the back side now, you may be able to tell there are these little lines of holes right above where that gill is. And so the water comes underneath through the gill and then exits out the top. So they're actually breathing sort of through their back, which is pretty cool. One of the other common misconceptions about horseshoe crabs is that because they have all this armature and these spikes and these claws, that they must be really fearsome predators. And that turns out to not really be true either. In reality, horseshoe crabs are perfectly happy to eat just about anything that they encounter. And if I'm perfectly honest, I am much the same way myself. So when they come across plants, they will happily eat those plants. If they find small animals, they will try to eat those animals as well. And in particular, they serve a really important function in their ecosystems because there's often a lot of kind of leftover organic stuff, debris, or as we call it, detritus, in marine habitats, sort of bits of plants and bits of other people's meals that they haven't quite finished. And horseshoe crabs serve sort of like ocean vacuum cleaners. I imagine them just sort of crawling along and eating up all of that extra stuff. So it provides them a great meal, but it also sort of removes all of that excess organic material from the environment, keeps it a bit cleaner and flourishing the way that it's supposed to. Well, I think the coolest thing about horseshoe crabs is not something that you'd ever know by looking at their outsides, and that's the fact that their blood is actually blue. It's like the color of this tray or the color of the sky. And when scientists realized this, they became instantly curious about what it is that makes horseshoe crab blood so different than our own, and in particular, if their blood might have some interesting different properties than our blood does. Now, we owe a debt of thanks to our horseshoe crab friends because it turns out that their blood has been really useful in the medical community. Now, just like a human blood donor, you can take a small amount of blood from an animal and not harm it. And so this blood has been brought back to the lab, and compounds and components of this blood have been isolated that are so sensitive to contamination, and in particular bacterial contamination, that they're used in places like hospitals and doctors' offices as a way of making sure that everything is as clean as it possibly can be. If there's any kind of impurity or contamination there, the horseshoe crab blood is going to let you know. So it's actually helped us be better at performing medicine, which I think is pretty cool. So I hope all of this has helped convince you that these somewhat fearsome-looking horseshoe crabs are actually really interesting, captivating animals, and not so scary at all. Thanks.
Discover more at ambler.temple.edu/science of scary.